There's a cave in Israel, Qafzeh cave. Inside, archaeologists found something that changed how we think about being human. A burial. 100,000 years old. Not just bones tossed in a hole. A careful burial. Intentional. The body was placed on its back. Legs drawn up. Arms positioned just so. Someone took time with this. Someone cared. And here's what gets me. Next to the body they found red ochre. A pigment. Ground up stone that makes a deep red colour. They'd sprinkled it over the grave. Why? Red ochre shows up in burials across the world. Different continents, different time periods, different cultures that never met each other, but they all did the same thing. They put red ochre with their dead. Nobody knows why. Some think it represented blood, life force. Maybe they hoped it would bring the person back, or keep them vital in whatever came next. Others think it was just beautiful. The first humans who saw red ochre probably thought it was magic. This powder that turns everything the colour of sunset, the colour of fire. Maybe beauty was reason enough, but here's what matters. This wasn't practical. It didn't help them survive. It didn't make tools sharper or food more plentiful. It served no purpose we can measure. It was symbolic, and that changes everything. If you're using this to fall asleep, subscribe. Leave your city and time. I love seeing where these stories reach. I always check the comments and it's fascinating. People across the world, different time zones, different lives. But we're all here, all wondering about the same questions. For 200,000 years before this burial, humans left almost nothing behind. They made tools, basic ones, hand axes that barely changed for 1,000,000 years. They survived. They spread across continents. But they didn't create art. They didn't bury their dead with ceremony. They didn't seem to think about meaning. Then something shifted. We don't know what. We don't know why. But around 100,000 years ago, humans started doing things that had no survival value. They made jewellery from shells. They painted with ochre. They buried their dead with care. They started believing in something. The Qafzeh burial proves it. Someone looked at a body and saw more than just meat and bone. They saw a person, someone who mattered, someone who deserved to be treated with respect even in death. That's not instinct. That's not survival. That's belief. Belief in what? We can't know. Maybe an afterlife. Maybe spirits. Maybe just the idea that some things matter beyond staying alive another day. But they believed something. And that belief made them do something impractical. Something that took time and effort and resources. Something that served no purpose except to honour the dead. This is where humanity begins. Not with bigger brains, not with better tools, but with the moment we started caring about things we couldn't see or touch or eat. The moment we started believing in more. The red ochre sits in a museum now, still red after 100,000 years, still beautiful, still mysterious, still asking us the same question it asked the people who placed it there. What do you believe in that you can't explain? Here's the thing about that burial. It shouldn't exist. Not because it's impossible, because for 200,000 years before it, nothing like it happened, and we need to understand what that means. Picture Earth 300,000 years ago. Modern humans appear. They look exactly like us. Same size brain, same body. If you dressed one up in jeans and a t-shirt, they'd blend in at any mall today. You wouldn't look twice. But they weren't like us. Not really. They made tools, simple ones, hand axes. You take a rock and chip away at it until you get a sharp edge. That's it. That's the technology. And here's what's wild. These hand axes didn't change. For 1,000,000 years. 1,000,000 years of making the same tool the same way. Think about that. We went from the first iPhone to the iPhone 15 in 16 years. They made the same hand axe for 1,000,000. They survived. They spread across Africa, into Asia. They hunted, they gathered, they raised children, they lived full lives, but they left almost nothing behind. No art, no jewellery, no decorations, no graves, no evidence they thought about anything beyond the next meal, the next day, the next season. Their brains were ready, the hardware was there, but something was missing, some spark, some shift in consciousness that makes us human in the way we think of human today. For 200,000 years they lived like this, generation after generation, thousands of generations, all with the same brain we have, all capable of everything we're capable of, but they didn't do it. Then around 100,000 years ago, something changed. Nobody knows what, nobody knows why. But humans started doing things differently. They started making art, carving beads from shells, painting with ochre, creating things that served no practical purpose, and they started burying their dead. Not everywhere, not all at once, but in scattered places across the world, humans began treating dead bodies differently, with care, with intention, with something that looks a lot like respect. The Qafzeh burial is one of the earliest we've found, maybe the earliest with clear symbolic elements, that red ochre, that careful positioning, that sense that this person mattered. But here's what makes it so strange. This behaviour appears suddenly. There's no slow build-up, no practice graves where they're figuring it out. One day they're leaving bodies where they fall. The next day they're creating elaborate burials with pigments and positioning and ritual. What happened? Some researchers think it was language. Maybe humans have been talking for thousands of years, but it was simple, practical. Danger, food, come here, basic stuff. Then something shifted. Language became complex, abstract. Humans could suddenly talk about things that weren't right in front of them. They could talk about death, about what happens after, about meaning. Once you can talk about death, you have to think about death. And once you think about death, everything changes. You're not just an animal anymore. You're an animal that knows it's going to die. That knowledge changes you. It makes you ask questions. What happens when we die? Is there something after? Does this life mean something? Should we honour the people who came before? Other researchers think it was culture. Maybe humans had always been capable of symbolic thought, but culture is fragile. It takes time to build. It can disappear in a single generation if nobody teaches the children. Maybe there were earlier burials, earlier art, earlier jewellery, but the groups that made them died out, or moved, or stopped teaching their children, and the knowledge was lost. Then around 100,000 years ago, something clicked. Maybe populations grew large enough that culture could survive. Maybe groups started trading ideas with each other. Maybe it just took that long for symbolic thinking to catch on. We don't know. We can only see what they left behind. And what they left behind at Qafzeh is clear. Someone cared about this dead person, cared enough to spend time and energy doing something that had no practical value. That's huge. That's the leap. Not just having the brain power to think symbolically, but choosing to use it. Choosing to spend resources on something that doesn't help you survive. Because here's the thing about survival. It's brutal. It's efficient. Nature doesn't waste energy. Every behaviour that survives is there because it helps the animal live longer, reproduce more, pass on its genes. But burial doesn't do that. Burial takes time, takes effort, takes resources. You're spending energy on someone who's already dead, someone who can't help you anymore, someone who can't repay you. It makes no sense from a survival perspective. But humans did it anyway, and they kept doing it for 100,000 years, right up to today. Why? The only answer that makes sense is belief. They believed something powerful enough to override pure survival instinct, something that made them see dead bodies not as waste, but as people who deserved respect. Maybe they believed in an afterlife. Maybe they thought the dead person's spirit was watching. Maybe they believed that how you treat the dead affects how you'll be treated when you die. Or maybe it was simpler. Maybe they just believed that people matter, that a life lived deserves to be honoured, that we owe something to those who came before. Whatever they believed, it was strong enough to change behaviour, strong enough to create a tradition that spread across the world, strong enough to last 100,000 years. And here's what gets me. We still do it. We still bury our dead with care. We still have ceremonies. We still mark graves. We still believe that how we treat dead bodies matters. The technology has changed. The religions have changed. The cultures have changed. But this core belief hasn't. This sense that death means something, that the dead deserve respect, that there's more to being human than just staying alive. The Qafzeh burial proves that this belief is ancient, older than any civilization, older than agriculture, older than writing. It might be one of the oldest human beliefs we have, and it emerged in a world that was incredibly harsh. These people lived hard lives, no medicine, no safety nets. Death was everywhere. Children died. Adults died young. Life was short and brutal and unfair. They could have just left the bodies. It would have been easier, more efficient, more practical, but they didn't. They chose to believe that even in death, people matter, that even when someone can't give anything back, they deserve to be treated with dignity. That's not survival instinct. That's not biology. That's belief. Pure belief. Belief in something they couldn't see or prove. Belief in meaning, in value, in something beyond the immediate moment. The world those people lived in was different from ours in almost every way. Different tools, different food, different dangers, different lives. But in this one thing, we're the same. We believe the dead matter. We believe death means something. We believe there's more to being human than just eating and sleeping and surviving another day. That belief started somewhere. Maybe it started at Qafzeh. Maybe it started earlier and Qafzeh is just the first evidence we've found. But it started, and once it started, it never stopped. 100,000 years later, we're still doing it. Still burying our dead with care. Still believing in something we can't fully explain. Still honouring people who can't benefit from our honour. The red ochre at Qafzeh connects us to those ancient people. They looked at that pigment and saw something meaningful, something worth including in a grave, something that mattered. We look at it today and we still don't fully understand why, but we recognise the impulse, the need to mark death as significant, the need to believe that people matter even after they're gone. That's the mystery, not just what they believed, but why we still believe it, why this one behaviour has survived when so much else has changed. Why belief itself seems to be such a fundamental part of being human. The Qafzeh burial doesn't answer these questions, it just shows us when they started being asked. 100,000 years ago, in a cave in Israel, by people who looked like us and thought like us and believed like us. People who chose meaning over efficiency, who chose belief over practicality, who chose to honour the dead even though it served no survival purpose. That choice echoes through time, every grave since then, every ceremony, every moment of silence, every belief that people matter beyond their ability to contribute. It all connects back to that first burial, that first choice to believe in something more. What did those ancient people believe? Why did they care about the dead? What made them human? These questions don't have answers. That's okay. Sometimes the mystery is enough. Let it carry you wherever you need to go. So what did they actually find at Qafzeh Cave? Let me walk you through it, because the details matter. They tell us something about what these people were thinking, what they believed. The skeleton was a young adult, maybe 20 years old. Hard to tell exactly. Bones don't give you precise ages, but young. Someone at the start of their life. The body was placed on its back, not thrown, not dropped, positioned. The legs were drawn up toward the chest, arms folded across the body. This takes effort. This takes time. You have to move a body into this position, hold it there, keep it stable while you arrange everything else. Then there's the red ochre, ground up hematite, an iron oxide that makes a deep red powder. They sprinkled it over the body. Not just a little. Enough that archaeologists could still see it 100,000 years later. That's a lot of ochre. Someone had to find the right stones, grind them down, collect the powder, bring it to the burial. And here's what really gets me. They placed objects with the body. A deer antler across the chest. Seashells, not local shells. These came from the Mediterranean coast, 40 miles away. Someone walked 40 miles to get shells, carried them back, put them in a grave. Think about what that means. This wasn't a quick burial. This wasn't, we need to get rid of the body before it smells. This was planned, deliberate. Multiple people involved, someone to prepare the body, someone to dig the grave, someone to gather the ochre, someone to fetch the shells. This was a community event, but Qafzeh isn't alone. Skull Cave sits nearby. Same region, same time period. Archaeologists found 10 burials there. 10, not one person, not an accident, a pattern, a tradition. One burial at school had a boar's jaw placed in the arms of the deceased, like they were holding it, cradling it. Why? Was the boar special? Did it mean something? Was this person a hunter, a leader, someone who'd killed this particular boar? We don't know. We can only see what they left behind, and what they left behind is intentional, meaningful, symbolic. Another burial had the body positioned facing east, toward the sunrise. That can't be random. You don't accidentally bury someone facing a specific direction. You choose it. You decide it matters. You make it happen. The pattern spreads. Jump forward 50,000 years. Shanidar Cave in Iraq. Neanderthals this time. Not modern humans. Our cousins. The species everyone thought was too primitive to think abstractly. Too simple to care about death. They found a burial there, surrounded by pollen. Flower pollen. Lots of it. Concentrated around the body. At first, archaeologists thought it was contamination. Pollen blows around, gets into things. But the concentration was too high, too focused. Someone had placed flowers in that grave. Yarrow, cornflower, hollyhock, groundsel, grape hyacinth. We know the exact species because pollen preserves. It tells us what grew there, what bloomed, what someone picked and brought to a burial. Why flowers? Why these flowers? Some have medicinal properties. Did they think the dead person would need medicine? Or did they just think flowers were beautiful? Did they want beauty in death? Again, we don't know, but the act itself speaks volumes. Neanderthals gathered flowers, brought them to a grave, placed them carefully. This takes thought. This takes feeling. The red ochre keeps appearing. Everywhere. Lake Mungo in Australia, 40,000 years ago. A burial covered in red ochre. So much ochre the bones are still stained. The person was cremated first. Then the bones were gathered, crushed, mixed with ochre, buried again. That's not simple. That's elaborate. That's ritual. Pavilan Cave in Wales, 33,000 years ago. The Red Lady of Paviland. Actually a young man. but so covered in red ochre they thought it was a woman at first. The ochre was inches thick in places. Someone used pounds of it, maybe more. This wasn't symbolic. This was drenching, coating, transforming. Sunghir in Russia, 34,000 years ago. 3 burials, an older man, 2 children, all covered in ochre, but also beads, thousands of beads, carved from mammoth ivory. Each bead took hours to make. One burial had over 3,000 beads sewn onto clothing. That's months of work. Maybe years. Someone spent years making beads for a burial. The children were buried head to head, touching. A spear made from a straightened mammoth tusk lay between them. The tusk alone weighed several pounds. Straightening it would have taken weeks. Heating it, bending it, letting it cool, heating it again, over and over until it was straight enough to use. Who were these people? Why did they deserve such elaborate burials? Were they special, or did everyone get this treatment? We only found 3 burials. Maybe everyone at Sunghir was buried like this. Maybe this was normal, but probably not. Probably these were important people, leaders, shamans, beloved children, someone worth the effort, someone worth the time. The pattern holds across continents, across cultures, across time. Tafarat Cave in Morocco, 15,000 years ago. Burials with shells, painted shells. Someone took time to decorate them, make them beautiful, then place them with the dead. Natarok in Kenya, 10,000 years ago. A massacre site. 27 people killed. But some were buried. Not all. Some. Someone came back after the violence, looked at the bodies, decided certain people deserved burial, others didn't. That's judgment. That's choice. That's belief about who matters. Çatalhöyük in Turkey, 9,000 years ago. They buried people under the floors of houses, right under where people walked, cooked, slept. The dead weren't separate, they were part of daily life. Literally underfoot. Family below, family above, all together. Some bodies at Çatalhöyük were painted with ochre, some weren't. Some had goods, some didn't. They were making distinctions. This person gets ochre. This one doesn't. This person gets beads. This one gets nothing. Why? What made the difference? We see hierarchy. We see choice. We see belief systems complex enough to have different treatments for different people. And it all starts at Qafzeh, 100,000 years ago. The first time we can prove humans believed in something beyond survival. Beyond the immediate, beyond the physical. That young person in the grave. They were dead. They couldn't use the shells, couldn't see the ochre, couldn't appreciate the careful positioning. But someone did it anyway. Someone believed it mattered. That's the leap. That's the moment. That's when humans became something more than just clever apes. We don't know what they believed. We can't. Belief doesn't fossilize. Ideas don't leave bones. But we can see the actions, the effort, the care, and those actions tell us something profound. These people thought death wasn't the end. Or if it was the end, it was an end that deserved respect, deserved beauty, deserved ritual. They couldn't explain consciousness, couldn't explain why people stopped breathing, stopped moving, stopped being. But they responded to that mystery with meaning, with purpose, with love. That's what gets me. That's what I think about sometimes. Somewhere in our past, someone looked at death and decided it needed to be beautiful, needed to be sacred, needed to be more than just disposal. And we've been doing it ever since. Every culture, every religion, every society. We all have ways to handle death, ways to honour it, ways to make it mean something. That impulse started 100,000 years ago in a cave in Israel. With red ochre and shells and a carefully positioned body. We inherited that impulse. We still feel it. We still believe death deserves ritual, deserves respect. deserves something beyond just they're gone. Maybe that's what makes us human. Not tools, not language, not art. But the belief that some things matter even when they serve no practical purpose. Even when nobody's watching. Even when the person we're honouring can't appreciate it. We do it anyway. We've always done it anyway. And it started in a cave, with someone who cared enough to gather shells from 40 miles away. Why couldn't we see this coming? That's what bothers me about Qafzeh. Not what they did, but what they didn't do before. For 190,000 years, modern humans left almost nothing behind. They had the same brains we do, same capacity for thought, same ability to plan and reason and imagine. But they didn't use it. Not for anything we'd recognize as culture. No burials, no art, no symbols, no signs they believed in anything beyond the immediate moment. Then suddenly, at Qafzeh, everything changes. They're burying their dead with ceremony, using red ochre, placing meaningful objects, creating ritual, believing in something invisible. What happened? What flipped the switch? Scientists have been arguing about this for decades, and nobody agrees. Some think it was genetic, a mutation. Something changed in the brain that unlocked symbolic thinking. The hardware was there, but the software needed an update. Like a computer that has all the right parts but needs the operating system installed. The problem? We can't find the mutation. We've sequenced ancient DNA, compared it to modern DNA. Nothing jumps out. No obvious change that says, this is when humans became human. Plus, the timeline doesn't work. Modern humans appeared 300,000 years ago. Qafzeh is 100,000 years ago. That's 200,000 years of waiting. If there was a mutation, why did it take so long to spread? Why didn't it happen immediately? Unless it wasn't one mutation, maybe it was several, small changes over time, each one adding a little more capability, like building a house. You don't just have a house one day. You lay a foundation, frame the walls, add a roof. Each step builds on the last. But even that doesn't explain the gap. 200,000 years is a long time to build anything. Other scientists think it was population. You need enough people before culture takes off. Ideas need to spread. Techniques need to be shared. One person inventing something doesn't matter if nobody else learns it. There's math behind this. Population density affects innovation. When groups are small and isolated, new ideas die out. When populations grow and connect, ideas stick. They combine, they improve, they become culture. Maybe early humans were too scattered, too few, living in small bands that rarely met. Then something changed. Climate, maybe. Resources. Whatever it was, populations grew. Groups started interacting more, trading, meeting, sharing. And once you have that network, culture explodes. Burial practices spread, art spreads, symbolic thinking spreads. Not because brains changed, but because people started talking to each other. This theory has evidence. Genetic studies show population bottlenecks, times when human numbers crashed. Maybe down to just a few thousand people worldwide. That would kill culture fast. No matter how smart you are, if you're alone, you can't build civilization. But here's the problem. The bottlenecks don't line up with the cultural explosion. Some happened before Qafzeh, some after. The timing is messy. It doesn't fit cleanly. Then there's the language theory. Maybe humans couldn't do symbolic thinking until they had language. Real language. Not just grunts and gestures, but grammar, syntax, the ability to talk about things that aren't right in front of you. Think about what language lets you do. You can describe the past, plan the future, explain abstract concepts. Without language, how do you teach someone about an afterlife? How do you explain why red ochre matters? How do you pass down burial traditions? You can't. Not really. Language is the tool that makes culture possible. But when did language appear? Nobody knows. Language doesn't fossilize. We can look at skulls, see if the brain had language areas. But having the anatomy doesn't prove you used it. Parrots have vocal anatomy. They don't write poetry. Some researchers think language appeared gradually. Others think it happened suddenly. One mutation that rewired the brain for grammar. The FOXP2 gene gets mentioned a lot. It's involved in speech. Humans have a different version than other animals, but even that's not clear-cut. Neanderthals had the same version we do. Did they have language? Maybe. We don't know. The evidence is frustrating. Every theory has support. Every theory has problems. Maybe it wasn't one thing. Maybe it was everything at once. Population grew. Language developed. Brains evolved. Climate changed. All of these factors feeding into each other, creating conditions where symbolic thinking could emerge. That's messy. Scientists don't like messy. We want clean answers, clear causes. But human evolution isn't clean. It's tangled, complicated, multiple pressures pushing in different directions. And here's what really complicates things. Qafzeh might not be the beginning. There are hints of earlier symbolic behavior, faint traces, controversial evidence. Blombos Cave in South Africa, 100,000 years ago, same time as Qafzeh. Archaeologists found ochre pieces with geometric patterns carved into them. Deliberate patterns, repeated designs. That's symbolic. That's art. But some scientists dispute it, say the patterns could be natural or functional. Maybe they were sharpening tools on the ochre and the marks are accidental. Pinnacle Point in South Africa, 164,000 years ago. Shell beads with holes drilled through them. Beads mean jewellery. Jewellery means decoration. Decoration means caring about appearance, about status, about identity. But again, disputed. Maybe the holes are natural. Maybe hermit crabs made them. Maybe humans just found them and thought they were pretty. That doesn't prove symbolic thinking. The problem is preservation. Symbolic behaviour often uses materials that don't last. Wood, feathers, paint on skin, dance, music, storytelling. None of that survives 100,000 years. We only see what happens to preserve. Burials with stone tools and ochre, carved shells, engraved rocks. How much are we missing? How much symbolic behaviour happened that left no trace? Maybe humans were doing ritual for thousands of years before Qafzeh. We just can't see it. The burial at Qafzeh is the first one that survived, the first one clear enough that scientists can't argue about it, but it might not be the first one that happened. That's humbling. We're trying to understand human consciousness by looking at a handful of artifacts. It's like trying to understand modern society by looking at what survives in a landfill. You'd get some things right, but you'd miss so much. And then there's the Neanderthal. Problem? They buried their dead too. We saw that at Shanidar. Flowers in the grave. Careful positioning. That's 50,000 years after Qafzeh. But Neanderthals are a different species. They split from us 500,000 years ago. Did they develop symbolic thinking independently? Or did they learn it from us? Modern humans and Neanderthals overlapped in the Middle East. They met. They interbred. We know this because we have Neanderthal DNA. Maybe they saw our burials and copied them. Or maybe symbolic thinking is older than we thought. Maybe it appeared before the split. Maybe both species inherited it from a common ancestor. We just don't have evidence from that far back. Every answer creates new questions. Some scientists think symbolic thinking isn't even the right question. Maybe we're looking at this wrong. Maybe there was no moment when humans became human. Maybe it was always there, dormant, waiting for the right conditions to express itself. like a seed. The seed has everything it needs to become a tree, but it needs soil, water, sunlight, the right temperature. Without those conditions, it stays a seed. The potential is there, it just can't manifest. Maybe human consciousness is like that. The capacity was always there, but early humans lived in conditions where symbolic thinking didn't matter. Survival mattered. Finding food, avoiding predators, raising children. That takes all your energy. There's no time for art, no resources for elaborate burials. Then conditions changed. Food became more reliable. Population stabilized. People had time, resources, safety. And suddenly, all that dormant potential could express itself. Not because brains changed, but because life changed. This theory is hard to test. How do you prove potential? How do you measure capacity that's not being used? But it fits with what we see in modern humans. Give a child no education, no culture, no language, and they won't develop normally. The potential is there. But potential needs nurturing, needs the right environment. Maybe that's what happened 100,000 years ago. The environment finally supported what humans could always do. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was a mutation, or language, or population, or all of it, or none of it. The honest answer is we don't know. We might never know. The evidence is too sparse, too ambiguous, too old. But we keep trying to understand, keep digging, keep analysing, keep arguing, because this question matters. It's not just about ancient humans. It's about us. What makes us human? When did it start? Why? These questions don't have answers yet. Maybe they never will. And somehow that's okay. The mystery is part of being human too. We're the species that asks why, that looks at a 100,000-year-old burial and wants to understand what it means, that curiosity, that need to know. That might be the most human thing of all. More than art, more than language, more than burial. We see a mystery and we can't let it go. We have to understand. Even when understanding is impossible, the people at Qafzeh would recognize that. They looked at death and couldn't let it go either, had to make it mean something, had to respond with ritual, with care, with belief. We're still doing the same thing, still trying to make meaning from mystery, still believing that understanding matters, even when we can't find it. Maybe that's the answer, not when we became human. But what being human means. We're the species that believes in things we can't explain, that creates meaning where none exists, that refuses to accept mystery without at least trying to solve it. That started at Qafzeh, or maybe before. We'll probably never know exactly when, but we can see it clearly in that burial. Someone cared, someone believed, someone thought death deserved more than nothing, and that impulse never stopped. We're still doing it, still caring, still believing, still making meaning from loss. The boar jaw in that grave. We'll never know what it meant, but we know it meant something. That's enough. That boar jaw, the one they placed in the grave at Qafzeh. What did it mean? Not what could it mean, not what might it symbolize. What did it actually mean to the person who put it there? We'll never know. That's the frustrating truth. We can theorize forever, make educated guesses, build elaborate explanations, but the actual meaning died with whoever placed it there, 100,000 years ago. Gone. But let's try anyway, because the attempt tells us something about ourselves, about what we think matters. First, the practical explanations. Maybe it was food, a last meal for the journey. Many cultures do this. Put food in graves. The logic is simple. If the dead person is going somewhere, they'll need provisions. You wouldn't send someone on a trip without supplies. Death is the ultimate journey, so you pack lunch. The Egyptians did this. Bread, beer, meat, all sealed in tombs. The Chinese did it too. Food vessels, wine jars, enough for a feast. Vikings loaded their burial ships with provisions. Even modern funerals sometimes include symbolic food, a favourite dish, a bottle of whiskey, something the person loved. So maybe the boar jaw was just that. Practical, here's some meat for the road. But I don't buy it. Not entirely. Because if it was just food, why specifically a jaw? Why not a whole haunch? Why not multiple pieces? A jaw has meat on it, sure. But it's not the best cut. It's not what you'd choose if you were packing the most food. Unless the jaw itself mattered. The specific bone, the shape, the symbolism. Boars are powerful animals, dangerous. A wild boar can kill you. They're fast, aggressive. Those tusks can gore you open. Hunting boar takes courage, skill, strength. It's not like hunting rabbits. You can't do it alone. You need a group, strategy, weapons, coordination. So maybe the jaw represented those qualities. Courage, strength, power. You're giving the dead person something they'll need. Not food, not calories, but the essence of the animal, its spirit, its power. This shows up everywhere in human culture. Warriors wearing bear teeth, chiefs wearing lion manes, hunters keeping the claws of dangerous prey. It's not decoration, it's transfer. You're taking the animal's qualities, making them yours. The Lakota kept eagle feathers. Eagles soar, see everything, never fear. So the feathers gave you those qualities, made you brave, clear-sighted, fearless. The Maori carved whalebone. Her whales are ancient, wise, connected to the deep. So wearing whalebone connected you to that wisdom, that depth, that power. Maybe the boar jaw worked the same way. You're giving the dead person the boar's strength, its ferocity, its ability to survive. Whatever they're facing next, they'll need those qualities. So you give them the jaw, the part that bites, the part that fights. This assumes something huge, though. It assumes they believed death wasn't the end, that the person continued somehow, went somewhere, needed things, could use gifts. That's a massive leap. That's symbolic thinking on a whole different level. Because here's what it requires. You have to imagine something you can't see, an afterlife, a spirit, a continuation. You have to believe in the invisible, trust in something beyond the physical world. That's not instinct. Animals don't do this. When an elephant dies, other elephants touch the bones, stand vigil, show what looks like grief. But they don't bury the body with gifts. They don't prepare it for a journey. They mourn, but they don't believe. Humans do. At Qafzeh they did. They believed in something. We just don't know what. Maybe it was reincarnation. The person would come back, be reborn. The boar jaw would help them in the next life, give them strength from the start, a head start on survival. Or maybe it was an underworld, a place the dead go, dark, dangerous, full of challenges. You'd need weapons, protection, power. The boar jaw would help you fight whatever you found there. Or maybe it was ancestor worship. The dead person was becoming something else, not human anymore, something more, a spirit, a guardian, a protector. The boar jaw marked that transformation, gave them the tools for their new role. We're projecting. I know we are. Taking what we know about later cultures and pushing it backward, assuming ancient people thought like we do, but we don't have much choice. The evidence is a jaw and a grave. Everything else is interpretation. Still, some interpretations fit better than others. The red ochre matters here. Remember the ochre? Sprinkled over the body. Red like blood. Red like life. Red like fire. That's not random. That's intentional. That's symbolic. Ochre shows up in burials worldwide. Different continents, different eras, but always the same colour, always red. That can't be coincidence. There's something about red that matters to humans, something deep, primal, universal. Maybe it's blood, the life force. You're giving the dead person back their vitality, their life, symbolically, so they can live again, somewhere else, somehow. Maybe it's earth, red soil, clay, the ground we come from, the ground we return to. You're marking the cycle, acknowledging the connection, earth to earth, dust to dust. Maybe it's fire, red flames, warmth, light, transformation. Fire changes things, wood becomes ash, food becomes energy, death becomes something else. The ochre marks that change, that transformation, that becoming. The Borjaw fits with any of these: blood and strength, earth and survival, fire and power. It works symbolically no matter what they believed. But here's what really gets me: the combination. Ochre and jaw, body positioned carefully, grave dug deliberately. This isn't one symbolic act, it's multiple, layered, complex. That suggests a system, not just random beliefs, an actual framework, a cosmology, a way of understanding death and life and what connects them. You don't develop that overnight. You don't wake up one morning and invent ritual. This took time, thought, conversation, agreement, a community deciding together what death means, what the dead need, how to honour them. That's culture, real culture, not just tools, not just survival, but shared meaning, collective belief, stories everyone knows, practices everyone follows. And that's what makes Qafzeh so important. It's not just a burial, it's proof of culture, proof of belief, proof that these people had crossed some threshold, become something new, something recognisably human. But what did they believe? What stories did they tell? We'll never know the specifics, but we can guess the themes. Because humans everywhere tell similar stories, different details, different names, but the same basic ideas. Life continues after death. That's universal. Almost every culture believes it. The details vary: heaven, hell, reincarnation, ghost world, ancestor realm. But the core idea is the same. Death isn't the end. The dead need help, also universal. You can't just die and figure it out yourself. You need preparation, guidance, gifts, protection. So the living help. Bury you properly, give you what you need, send you off right. This world and the next are connected, not separate, not isolated, connected. What you do here matters there. What happens there affects here. The boundary is thin, permeable, crossable. These ideas show up everywhere. Ancient Egypt, modern Christianity, indigenous Australian beliefs, Japanese Shinto, Hindu philosophy. The details differ wildly, but the framework is similar. Maybe that framework is hardwired. Maybe believing in an afterlife is part of being human, not learned, not cultural, biological, something our brains do naturally. Or maybe it's inevitable. Once you're smart enough to know you'll die, you can't accept it. Your brain rebels, invents continuity, creates meaning, refuses to believe in absolute ending. Either way, it shows up at Qafzeh. 100,000 years ago, these people knew death, understood it, and refused to accept it as final. So they created ritual, meaning, belief. The Borjaw is part of that, a physical object carrying invisible meaning. That's what symbols do. They bridge the gap between the material and the immaterial, between what you can touch and what you can only imagine. A flag is just cloth, but it represents a nation, an idea, a shared identity. You can burn the cloth, but you can't burn what it represents. That exists in minds, in culture, in belief. The Borjaw is the same. It's just bone, but it carried meaning, represented something, communicated belief to the dead person maybe, or to the living, or to whatever they thought was watching. We do this constantly. Wedding rings, diplomas, medals, trophies. They're objects, metal, paper, plastic. But they mean something beyond their material. They carry significance, tell stories, represent achievements, connections, commitments. The people at Qafzeh were doing the same thing, using objects to communicate meaning. That's sophisticated, that's abstract, that's deeply human. And it's not just the jaw, it's everything together. The positioning of the body, the ochre, the careful burial, the location, the time spent. All of it combines into a statement, a declaration, an act of meaning-making. This person mattered. That's the message. They mattered enough to take time, use resources, create ceremony, honor their passing, remember them. That's love, or respect, or duty, or all three. But it's emotional, it's connection, it's caring about someone beyond their usefulness, beyond their ability to hunt or gather or reproduce. You're caring about them as a person, as an individual, as someone worth remembering, worth honoring, worth preparing for whatever comes next. That's new, that's different. That's what separates humans from everything else. Animals care for their young, protect their mates, mourn their dead sometimes. But they don't create ritual, don't build meaning, don't believe in invisible realms where symbolic objects matter. We do. At Qafzeh they did. And that changes everything. Because once you start believing in the invisible, you can imagine anything. Gods, spirits, souls, afterlives, morality, justice. Love that transcends death. All of human civilization flows from that. Art, religion, philosophy, law, science even. All of it starts with the ability to believe in things you can't see, to create meaning from mystery, to insist that there's more than just the physical. The boar jaw represents that leap, that transformation, that moment when humans became something new. We still don't know what it meant specifically, what story they told about it, what belief system it fit into, what the person who placed it was thinking. But we know it meant something. That's enough. That's everything. Because meaning itself is the point, not the specific meaning. The fact that they created meaning at all, that they looked at death and refused to accept it as meaningless, that they responded with ritual, with care, with belief, were still doing it, still creating meaning, still refusing to accept mystery without response, still believing in things we can't explain. The boar jaw started something, or marked something that had started. Either way, it's still going, still mattering, still making us human. There's a twist in this story that most people never expect. When scientists first dug up those burials at Qafzeh, they thought they were looking at something that made humans completely unique. Ritual, symbolic thinking, the leap from just surviving to believing in invisible things. For a long time, that's how the story went. Only humans did this. Only we buried our dead with meaning attached. But then something strange showed up. In a cave far from Qafzeh, deep in the rock of southern Europe, they found another burial. This one wasn't made by humans. It was made by Neanderthals. Neanderthals, the other humans. Not our direct ancestors, but our cousins. They lived in Europe and parts of Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. We picture them as brutish and simple, but that's not fair. They were clever in their own way, stronger than us, adapted to cold. But for decades, everyone thought they were missing something essential. That spark of culture, the ability to believe in more than just the world in front of them. Here's where it gets interesting. archaeologists started finding clues that Neanderthals might have buried their dead too. Not just left them where they fell, but actually dug graves, sometimes with objects, sometimes with animal bones, sometimes with flowers, and this changes everything. The most famous Neanderthal burial was found in Iraq at a place called Shanidar Cave. The skeleton belonged to a man. He'd had a hard life, injuries, arthritis, one arm missing. He survived for years, probably because others helped him. When he died, someone buried him in a shallow pit. But here's the detail that surprised everyone. The soil around him was filled with ancient pollen. Not just a little, but a lot. From several different kinds of flowers. Some scientists argued this meant Neanderthals placed flowers in the grave. Not for food, not by accident, but as a gesture, a sign of care, maybe even a sign of belief. Others said the pollen could have drifted in later. Maybe rodents brought it. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but the idea stuck. Flowers in a grave, a Neanderthal honouring the dead, and there's more. In France, at a site called La Chapelle-aux-Saints, another Neanderthal was carefully placed in a hole. The body was positioned. The grave was lined with stone. This wasn't just a body dumped in a ditch. Someone took the time to make it right. At Rigourdoux, also in France, archaeologists found a Neanderthal skeleton with bare bones placed nearby. Not just scattered, but arranged. Some think this was a ritual. Others say maybe it was just food left by accident. But the pattern keeps showing up. Bodies placed with care, animal bones added, sometimes hints of fire or tools. It's not just one site. It's not just one body. These burials pop up again and again from Spain to Uzbekistan. Each one different. Each one telling the same basic story. Neanderthals did things that look a lot like human ritual. Of course there's debate. Scientists love to argue. Some say these burials don't count. Maybe the pits are natural. Maybe the bones moved by accident. Maybe the objects aren't offerings, just leftovers from a meal. It's hard to prove intention when you're looking at bones tens of thousands of years old. But the more graves they find, the harder it is to ignore. The details add up. Bodies placed with care, objects included, sometimes red pigment, just like at Qafzeh, sometimes tools or animal parts, sometimes the body's curled up protected, sometimes it's lying flat, arms folded. One of the most famous Neanderthal children found at Roc de Marsal in France was placed in a pit, head resting on a stone. The pit was filled in gently. No sign of scavengers. No sign of a rush. Someone took time over this. And here's a curveball. At El Sidron in Spain, archaeologists found a family group. Men, women, children. All Neanderthals. Their bones showed signs of being processed. Cut marks, broken for marrow. It looks grim, but here's the point. Someone cared enough to place the bones together. Even in the middle of hardship, the group stayed connected. Now, did Neanderthals believe in an afterlife? Did they imagine spirits or journeys or invisible worlds? That's the big question. The evidence isn't as clear as with humans at Qafzeh. There's no carved art, no obvious symbols, no painted beads or jewellery, but the pattern is there. Careful burials, objects chosen, bodies protected. Some scientists say this means Neanderthals were close to us in their thinking. Maybe not identical, but not a world apart either. They felt loss. They honoured the dead. Maybe they believed in something more. Others are cautious. They point out that animals sometimes move bones, that gravity and water can rearrange a site, that what looks like a grave might just be a lucky accident, but it's hard to believe in that many accidents, happening in so many places over so many years. Let's zoom out for a second. What does this tell us? If Neanderthals buried their dead, that means ritual isn't just a human thing. It didn't pop up out of nowhere. It might be older than we thought. Maybe it was already there, waiting before our species split apart. Think about that. Two different kinds of humans, us and Neanderthals, living in different places but doing similar things. Both groups digging graves, both groups placing bodies with care, sometimes with objects, sometimes with pigment. Not just for practical reasons, but because it meant something. It's like a parallel invention. Two minds, separated by distance and time, reaching the same answer. Death matters. The dead deserve respect. Ritual isn't just a human invention, it's a human family invention, and it gets weirder. Neanderthals weren't the only ones. In Siberia, scientists found evidence that the Denisovans, a mysterious group related to both us and Neanderthals, might have made jewellery and used pigments too. They left behind a carved bracelet, greenstone beads, and what looks like coloured powder. The Denisovans are a shadowy branch on the family tree, but even their brief traces suggest they thought about meaning, about beauty, maybe even about death. So what separates us from them? For years, people said it was art, or language, or the ability to plan for the far future. But every time we draw that line, new evidence shows up to blur it again. Neanderthals made tools almost as complex as ours. They used fire, they hunted in groups, they cared for the injured, they may have even made simple jewellery, eagle talons strung together, or shells with holes drilled in them. There's a cave in Spain where Neanderthals made paintings on the wall, not stick figures, but simple shapes, dots, lines, handprints made by blowing pigment over a hand pressed to the rock. These paintings are more than 64,000 years old. That's before humans ever set foot in Europe. Only Neanderthals could have made them. What does a red dot on a cave wall mean? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Maybe it's a mark of presence. I was here. Maybe it's a symbol. Maybe it's a kind of magic. But whatever it is, it's not survival. It's not food. It's something extra. Something about meaning. So back to burials. If Neanderthals did them, and humans did them, and maybe even Denisovans did them, then ritual goes deep. Deeper than language, maybe. Deeper than art, even. Ritual could be one of the oldest human behaviours. Why does this matter? Because it means the urge to mark death, to give it meaning, isn't just a cultural trick we picked up along the way. It's something built into us. Something that shows up again and again, no matter which branch of the human family tree you look at. Even chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, sometimes act strangely around the dead. They'll stay near a body for hours. They'll clean it, or defend it from predators. Sometimes they seem to mourn, but they don't dig graves. They don't add objects. They don't do ritual. Neanderthals crossed that line. So did we. Maybe for the same reasons, maybe for different ones. But the result is the same. A body placed with care, a world changed by death, a group refusing to just walk away. And here's another thing. When you look at the timing, something odd appears. The oldest Neanderthal burials are about 70,000 years old. The Qafzeh burial is even older. Did one group copy the other? Hard to say. Maybe they learned from each other. Maybe the idea was in the air, spreading as people met and mixed and shared stories. There's some evidence the two groups met and even had children together. DNA from Neanderthal shows up in almost everyone outside Africa today. That means our species and theirs weren't as separate as we once thought. Maybe beliefs spread along with genes. Maybe ritual passed from one group to another, changing a little each time. It's possible the roots go back even further. Maybe the urge to honour the dead started before the split, in a common ancestor. Maybe it's been with us from the beginning. And if that's true, then ritual is as old as humanity itself. Not just something we invented, but something we inherited. Here's a question that keeps coming up. If Neanderthals believed in ritual, did they have stories? Did they tell tales about where the dead went? Did they believe in spirits, or gods, or ancestors watching over them? Or was it something simpler? Maybe just a feeling that death should be marked, that ignoring it would be wrong. We'll never know for sure. Neanderthals left no written language, no myths carved in stone. All we have are bones, tools, pigments, and a few lines on a cave wall. But sometimes that's enough. Sometimes the pattern tells its own story. It's easy to look at these ancient burials and see ourselves, to imagine Neanderthals thinking like we do, loving their families, missing their friends, hoping for something after death. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's just what we want to see. But the facts are there. Burials, objects, pigment, care. Over and over in different places by different hands. It's not a one-time fluke. It's a thread running through human history from Neanderthals to us. So why does this matter for the Qafzeh burial? Because it means the leap to ritual wasn't a single jump. It didn't happen in one moment in one cave by one group. It happened in parallel, in many places, in many minds. The idea caught on because it answered a deep need to remember, to honour, to make sense of loss. And maybe that's the real story. Not that one group invented belief, but that belief was always there, waiting to be found. As soon as brains got big enough, as soon as language got flexible enough, as soon as hearts got soft enough, the rituals appeared, almost like they were inevitable. Maybe that's why every culture that ever existed has some form of burial, some way of marking death, some story about what comes next. It's not an accident. It's not a coincidence. It's the oldest tradition there is. Neanderthal graves are rare, but they're real. Each one is a message from the past, a clue that our need for meaning, our wish to connect with what's gone, is older than we are. It's older than stories, older than art, older than words. And that means the person who placed the boar jaw at Qafzeh was part of something bigger, not just their own family, not just their own tribe, but a tradition as old as humanity. A tradition that connects us to people who look different, spoke different, saw the world in different ways, but who felt the same pull to mark the end, to remember, to honour. It's easy to forget how much we share with these ancient cousins. When you see a burial, you're looking at a conversation that started before history. One group in Israel, another in France, others in Spain, Iraq, Uzbekistan. All saying the same thing in their own way. You mattered. You're not forgotten. We send you on. That's the power of ritual. It's not about the details, not about the objects. It's about the message. The same message over and over for tens of thousands of years. The Qafzeh burial isn't an outlier. It's part of a pattern that started before us and continues today. And next, we'll see how that pattern kept going, spreading to every culture, every time, every place where humans lived. Because the story of ritual didn't stop with us. It became the story of everyone. What came after those first burials? Once humans, and our cousins, started marking death, the pattern didn't just stop. It spread, not in a straight line, but like roots growing out in every direction. Let's look at how this spread happened and what it shows about us. First, think about the spread of people. After those early burials in the Middle East and Europe, humans kept moving. They followed rivers and coastlines. They crossed mountains and deserts. Over thousands of years, small groups left Africa and wandered into new lands. Every time they moved, they took their habits with them. Some habits faded away, but others stuck. Ritual was one of those things that stayed. When people reached Australia, around 65,000 years ago, they carried more than just stone tools. Archaeologists have found signs that these early Australians had their own way of marking the dead. At Lake Mungo, they found a skeleton sprinkled with red powder, the same deep red colour as Qafzeh, made from ground minerals. This wasn't a copy of the old ritual. These people had never seen Qafzeh. They'd been separated for thousands of years, but the instinct was the same: mark the dead, use colour, make it matter. Thousands of miles away in the frozen north, another group did something similar. In Russia, at a place called Sunghyr, 2 children were buried side by side. This was about 34,000 years ago. The graves were packed with beads, thousands of them, all carved from mammoth ivory. Some beads were sewn onto clothing, others were scattered around the bodies. There were carved animal figures, spears made from straightened mammoth bone, and even a disc made from a mammoth tusk. No one does this by accident. Someone spent hundreds of hours making those beads. Someone cared enough to give them up. Why go to all that effort? These people weren't rich. They lived in the middle of the Ice Age. Food was hard to find, life was short, but they still took time to make something beautiful, just to send it into the ground. The message is clear. The dead deserved more than just a hole in the dirt, and it kept happening. In Europe, the Gravettian people buried their dead with shells, animal teeth, and even fox fur. In North Africa, bodies were wrapped in antelope skins. In East Asia, at Tianyuan Cave, a person was buried with deer bones, carefully arranged. In the Americas, people came much later, maybe 15,000 years ago, but some of the oldest burials there, like at the Upward Sun River site in Alaska, show the same careful placement. A child was buried with red ochre and decorated antler rods. The same pattern, again and again. It's not just the objects, it's the way the bodies are handled. Sometimes they're flexed, knees drawn to the chest, sometimes laid flat, arms at the sides, sometimes surrounded by stones or even covered with slabs to protect them. Some groups built mounds, others dug deep pits. Sometimes the bodies were burned first, then buried. Sometimes they were left out for scavengers and buried later. The details change, but the idea stays. Death needs to be marked, and over time, these practices grew more complex. As societies grew, so did their rituals. Think about Egypt, thousands of years after Qafzeh. The Egyptians built pyramids. They mummified their dead, wrapped them in linen and packed the tombs with food, jewellery, and even tiny statues meant to serve the dead in the afterlife. They wrote prayers on the walls. They told stories about what happened after death. The whole system was designed to help someone make it safely to another world. But even without pyramids, you see the same thing elsewhere. In ancient China, kings were buried with entire armies of clay soldiers. In Central America, the Maya built tombs under their cities, filling them with jade and offerings. In Europe, the Celts built huge burial mounds, some packed with gold and weapons, others with nothing but stones and earth. In Africa, some communities built giant stone circles round graves. In the Pacific, people carved wooden figures to watch over the dead. It wasn't always about power or wealth. Even ordinary people had their ways. In ancient Greece, families left food and wine at the graves. In Rome, they marked the anniversary of a loved one's death with feasts. In India, funeral pyres sent smoke spiralling into the sky, carrying the soul upward. In Japan, stones were stacked, incense burned, and names chanted for years after someone was gone. The basic idea never changed. Every group, big or small, tried to make sense of death, tried to give it meaning, tried to send a message. You're not forgotten, and the evidence is everywhere. Archaeologists have found graves on every continent except Antarctica. Some are simple, others are so rich they're called princely burials. But it's not the gold or jewels that matter most, it's the signs of care. The patterns show up over and over, bodies arranged with purpose, objects chosen for a reason, colours used to mark flesh and bone. Some places, like the Levant, have graves stretching back 15,000 years with people buried alongside dogs, the first pets honoured at death. In other places, like Scandinavia, ships were used as coffins, whole boats dragged onto land, filled with bodies and goods, then set on fire or buried under mounds. In parts of North America, entire villages came together for burial mounds, huge earthworks built over many years, each layer marking another loss, another memory. And here's something strange. Even when cultures changed everything else, language, clothing, tools, the urge to mark death stayed. When farmers replaced hunters, they kept burying the dead. When cities grew, people built cemeteries. When new religions appeared, burial changed shape but never vanished. Why? Nobody knows for sure, but the pattern is too solid to ignore. Death touches every life. Ritual helps people handle it. Maybe it's about memory, maybe it's about hope, maybe it's just about facing the unknown together. Let's talk about the scale of this. In Europe alone, there are tens of thousands of ancient graves. Some are massive, like the tombs at Newgrange in Ireland, older than the pyramids, built with huge stones dragged for miles. These tombs line up with the sun on certain days, filling the chamber with light. Some think this means the dead were tied to the cycles of nature. Life, death, rebirth, all connected. In China, the tomb of the first emperor holds more than 8,000 life-sized clay soldiers, horses and chariots. It took 700,000 workers to build. The message? This person mattered. They deserved an army in the next world. But you don't need to be a king to get a ritual. In the Andes, high in the mountains, mummies were placed on ledges facing the sunrise. In Australia, trees were carved with marks to show where someone was buried. In the Arctic, stones were piled in circles marking where a hunter was laid to rest. The details shift with time and place, but the core idea is always there. Death is a moment of change. A moment that needs to be marked. What about beliefs? Did all these people imagine the same thing happened after death? Not likely. Some groups talked about souls travelling to another world. Others believed the dead became ancestors, watching over the living. Some thought the spirit turned into an animal, a star, or the wind. Some didn't describe an afterlife at all, but still kept the rituals. The details changed, but the urge to do something never faded. Let's look at a few more examples just to show how wide this goes. In Papua New Guinea, some groups saved the skulls of relatives, keeping them in decorated houses. In Madagascar, there's a tradition called Famadihana. Every few years, families dig up the bones of ancestors, rewrap them in fresh cloth, and dance with them before returning them to the tomb. In Tibet, the sky burial is common. Bodies are taken to mountain tops and left for birds. The logic. The soul is gone. The body returns to nature. In medieval Europe, bones were sometimes gathered into ossuaries, rooms filled with thousands of skulls and femurs stacked in patterns. In Central Asia, some nomads buried their leaders with horses, weapons, and cups. In Polynesia, chiefs were buried in caves or under stone platforms, guarded by taboo. There are so many examples, it's impossible to list them all. Every place you look, people found a way to make death meaningful. Sometimes it's about helping the dead move on. Sometimes it's about comforting the living. Sometimes it's just about showing respect. Over time, rituals got more organized. Religions grew up around them. Priests, shamans, monks, and holy people took charge of burials. New rules appeared. What to wear, what to say, how long to mourn. Some cultures said you had to wash the body a certain way. Others said you had to wait a number of days before burial. Some burned the dead. Others buried them deep. Some left them out on towers, like in ancient Persia, where vultures cleaned the bones. But at the heart of all these rules is something simple. Someone dies, and the living need to do something, to act, to remember, to let go, and the pattern keeps going. Even today, with all our technology, people still hold funerals, they still bring flowers, they still tell stories, sing songs, and gather to remember the one who's gone. Sometimes the rituals are ancient, sometimes they're brand new. But the urge behind them hasn't changed. What does all this mean? It means that the Qafzeh burial, and every burial since, wasn't just a one-off. It was the start of something that never stopped. A chain reaction. A tradition that grew and spread and changed, but never disappeared. It also means that the roots of ritual are deep, deeper than any one culture, deeper than language, maybe even deeper than art. Ritual is the thing that sticks, even when everything else falls apart. Think about this. When archaeologists find a grave, even after thousands of years, they can tell a lot about the people who made it, what they cared about, what they feared, what they hoped for. A grave is a message across time. Sometimes it's clear, sometimes it's a puzzle, but it always says, we were here, we remembered. And that's the real power of these ancient burials. They're the first written stories, even if there are no words. Each one is a chapter in the oldest book in the world, the story of how humans learned to care for the dead and for each other. Some people see this as proof of belief in an afterlife. Others see it as a way to hold a community together. Maybe it's both, maybe it's something else. The truth is, nobody can say for sure, but the pattern is too strong to ignore. Everywhere humans went, they made ritual. Every time they faced loss, they found a way to answer it. Sometimes with colour, sometimes with objects, sometimes with nothing but silence and a careful touch. And here's something I find oddly comforting. Even when everything else changed, ice ages, wars, new religions, lost languages, this part stayed. People kept marking the end, kept remembering, kept sending messages into the dark, hoping for an answer. So what came after those first burials? Everything. The whole world of ritual. The endless ways we try to say goodbye, the stories we tell, the ceremonies we build, the hope that there's something more, even if we'll never know what it is. And if you zoom out, you can see the shape of it running through all of history. A thread connecting us back to people who lived so long ago their names are gone, but their message is still here. That someone cared, that someone remembered, that's the evidence. Not just bones and beads, but the fact that every culture, everywhere, found their own answer to the same question. What do we do when someone is gone? The answers are different, but the need is the same. And that's what came next. The pattern that started with one burial kept going, all the way to now. The story isn't finished. We're still writing it, every time we gather to remember someone who's left us behind. Next, we'll see how that ritual changed shape as time passed, evolving as people moved, as belief shifted, as the world turned. Because the pattern didn't freeze in place. It kept growing, just like us. If you want to really understand why people started believing in things they couldn't see, you have to look at the clues they left behind. Archaeologists and scientists spend years digging through layers of earth, hoping to find something more than just bones. They're searching for hints, tiny things that might show what people were thinking, what they valued, or what they feared. These clues aren't always obvious. Sometimes it's a mark on a stone. Sometimes it's the way an object is placed. Sometimes it's a whole arrangement that only makes sense once you step back and see the pattern. Let's start with objects that don't belong. Imagine you're digging and you find a shell necklace. Deep inland, miles from the sea. Or you find a piece of red mineral tucked under a skeleton, even though the nearest source is 30 miles away. These things didn't just fall there by accident. Someone brought them. Someone thought they mattered enough to carry all that way. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, for example, scientists found tiny shells with holes drilled in them. Some are more than 70,000 years old. The holes aren't natural. People made them, one by one, and strung them together to make necklaces or bracelets. These beads were found alongside lumps of ochre. Yes, that same red mineral. Some of the ochre pieces had lines carved into them. Simple lines, but clearly made on purpose. Not just scratches, not random. Patterns, maybe even symbols. Why would you spend hours carving a design into a piece of rock, then tuck it away? Why string together seashells if nobody is going to see them? The answer isn't clear, but it shows something important. These people were thinking about more than just food and shelter. They wanted to make things that lasted. They wanted to leave a mark. Now, let's talk about the objects found with burials. Sometimes what's buried with a person is stranger than the grave itself. In certain places, archaeologists have found animal bones mixed in with human remains, not leftovers from a meal. These bones are often whole, sometimes carefully cleaned, sometimes arranged in patterns. In some early graves, the bones of rare animals, like eagles or big cats, are placed near the head or hands. These animals weren't easy to catch. They had to be hunted or trapped. So why add their bones to a grave? Maybe these animals had special meaning. Maybe they were believed to have power or to help in the next world. Or maybe they were just trophies, a way to show respect or courage. One famous example comes from the site of Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic. Around 27,000 years ago, 3 people were buried together, 2 young men and a woman. The bodies were arranged next to each other, with the woman in the middle. One of the men's hands was placed on her pelvis. Around them were mammoth bones, fox teeth, and small carved figures made of clay. The whole thing looks staged, almost like a scene. It's not just a case of digging a hole and dropping bodies in. Someone planned this. Someone wanted to send a message, though we'll never know exactly what it was. Another strange clue is the use of colour. Red ochre shows up again and again in ancient burials, across Europe, Asia, Africa, and even Australia. But sometimes other colours appear too. In some graves you'll find yellow or black minerals dusted over bones. In a few rare cases, blue or green stones are included, even though those colours are harder to find. The colour isn't random. It's chosen, ground up, and sprinkled on purpose. Scientists have tried to figure out what these colours meant. Some think red stood for blood, life, or rebirth. Others think it was more about power or protection. We'll never have a final answer, but the pattern is clear. Colour mattered. Moving on, let's look at the shape of graves. Many early burials are simple pits, but sometimes people went further. They lined graves with stones. They built small walls or roofs over the body. In some places they stacked rocks to create a mound. In others, they carved out chambers or dug tunnels. The amount of work is huge, especially for people with no metal tools. Why all the effort? It wasn't to hide the body. Predators and scavengers could still find them. It looks more like a way to create a special space, a place set apart from ordinary life. There's one site called La Chapelle aux Saints in France, where scientists found a skeleton placed in a shallow pit, with stones arranged around it. This was a Neanderthal, not a modern human. The bones had been there for more than 60,000 years. The pit wasn't just a natural dip in the ground, it was dug out. The stones were set on purpose. This is one of the earliest examples of a grave that's clearly set apart from the world above. You can see the same thing in the caves of Israel, in the hills of Spain, and in the valleys of Russia. The details are always different, but the idea is the same. Create a space for the dead, make it separate, make it meaningful. Another piece of evidence comes from the things people left behind at the entrance to graves. In some places, archaeologists have found piles of stones, burnt wood, or broken tools right outside the grave. Sometimes there are animal bones, sometimes bits of pottery or broken beads. These aren't garbage piles. They often show signs of being arranged, and they're always close to the grave, not scattered around. This makes scientists think there were ceremonies. Maybe people gathered to say goodbye. Maybe they brought things to offer or to break as part of the ritual. In a few rare cases, there's evidence of fire, burn marks around the grave, layers of ash, sometimes even bits of burned food or plants. Lighting a fire takes effort. Keeping it burning during a ceremony takes even more. Why bother? Maybe fire was used to keep away animals, or maybe it was part of the ritual, a way to guide the soul or to purify the space. We can only guess. And then there's the question of grave goods, the objects placed with the dead. These range from simple tools to elaborate jewellery. In some graves you'll find nothing but a few stones. In others the person is surrounded by beads, shells, carved figurines, and sometimes weapons or tools. The most famous example might be the Venus figurines, small statues of women found across Europe and dating back around 30,000 years. Some of these were buried with people, some were left in caves or at the entrance to graves. The meaning is still debated, but they clearly mattered to someone. But grave goods aren't just about wealth or power. In many ancient graves, even those of children or people who didn't seem important, you find personal objects, a favourite tool, a bead, a carved bone. These things weren't valuable in themselves. They held meaning for the person or their family. Maybe they were meant to help in the next world. Maybe they were kept as reminders. Maybe they carried memories or stories. Let's not forget the arrangement of bodies. In some cultures, people were buried curled up, almost like they were sleeping. In others, the body was stretched out. Sometimes the head faced the rising sun. Sometimes it faced west or looked toward a mountain, river, or special place. These positions weren't random. They were chosen, and the pattern often matched local beliefs or stories. A good example comes from the cemetery at Sungir in Russia. 2 children were laid side by side, covered with thousands of beads, their arms stretched out. The position is careful, not careless. The bodies are dressed in special clothes, with bead necklaces and bracelets. The heads are decorated with animal teeth and ivory pins. Someone spent hundreds of hours making and arranging all this. The children were valued, even though they died young. Now let's talk about the scale of these practices. In some places you find single graves, one person, one pit. In others, you find whole cemeteries with dozens or even hundreds of graves. Sometimes they're lined up in rows. Sometimes they're grouped in circles or clusters. The pattern often matches the way people lived, close together or scattered across the land. The existence of cemeteries says something important. It means people cared about keeping their dead together. It means they remembered where past generations were buried. It means they came back, maybe to visit, maybe to add new graves, maybe to hold ceremonies. This is a big step. It turns the land into a place of memory, not just a place to live. Some cemeteries grew over hundreds or thousands of years. In places like Lake Turkana in Kenya, there are stone pillars marking graves that go back 5,000 years. In England, places like Stonehenge started as burial sites. Long before the stones were raised, people buried their dead there in small mounds. Over time, the site became layered with meaning. It was a place to gather, to remember, to mark the passing of seasons and generations. What about signs of belief? Sometimes archaeologists find images carved into rocks near graves, shapes that look like animals, people, or even imaginary creatures. Sometimes they find painted scenes, spirals, dots, hands, or suns. These images aren't always clear, but they show that people were trying to say something, to record something that mattered. In some cases, you find symbols that repeat across many graves, even far apart. Spiral designs show up in Ireland, Spain, and Malta. Handprints are found on cave walls in France, Argentina, and Indonesia. It's tempting to think these symbols held special meaning, maybe about life and death, maybe about journeys or ancestors. We'll never know for sure, but the repetition is hard to ignore. Let's not skip the role of the community. In many cases, the number of people involved in a burial is shocking. To build a mound or a stone circle, you need dozens or hundreds of people. To carve a chamber in rock, you need time, tools, and teamwork. To create a cemetery, people have to agree on rules: where to dig, how to arrange things, what to bring. This means burials weren't just private family affairs. They involved the whole group. They were social events, maybe even times for stories, songs, or shared meals. Sometimes the evidence points to even bigger gatherings. In North America, the Hopewell people built earthworks that stretched for miles, and some mounds contain the remains of people from distant places. Objects found in these graves, copper from the Great Lakes, shells from the Gulf Coast, mica from the Appalachians, show that people traded, travelled, and shared ideas. Death brought people together across huge distances. Another clue comes from the way some bodies were treated before burial. In a few rare cases, the bones were cleaned, painted, or even reburied after some time. This is called secondary burial. In Madagascar, families still practice a version of this, digging up ancestors and celebrating with them before returning them to the tomb. In ancient Europe and the Middle East, bones were sometimes gathered and placed in special boxes or caves long after the person died. This suggests that the dead continued to matter, that memory was kept alive. So, what does all this add up to? When you put together the objects, the colours, the positions, the images, and the work involved, you see a clear picture. People weren't just reacting to death. They were trying to make sense of it. They were using ritual, art, and memory to hold on to something beyond the everyday. They were building a bridge between the world of the living and whatever comes after. Some scientists say this is proof of belief in an afterlife. Others say it's about keeping the group together, or about respect, or just about fear. Maybe it's all of those things at once, but the evidence is real. It's in the ground, in the stones, in the bones, and in the stories that archaeologists rebuild from the smallest scraps. Here's something else to keep in mind. This pattern doesn't stop in the Stone Age. As people invented farming, built cities, and wrote down their beliefs, the rituals grew more complex. But the old habits stayed. Even in places with no writing, no kings, and no big temples, you still find careful burials. You still find objects tucked under heads, colours painted on bones, people remembered for years after they're gone. And here's what's kind of amazing. Sometimes scientists find graves where nothing fancy was done. No beads, no ochre, no carvings, just a body, placed quietly in the earth. Even this is a kind of ritual. Even this says someone noticed. Someone paused. Someone cared enough to do something different from just leaving the body where it fell. All these clues, taken together, make up what you might call the archaeology of belief. It's not about proving what people thought. It's about seeing the tracks they left behind and knowing that they were reaching for meaning just like we do now. That's why these discoveries matter. They show us that even the earliest humans and their cousins were facing the same questions we face. What happens when someone dies? How do we remember them? How do we keep going? The answers are buried all over the world, in beads, in bones, in stones, in colours, in the way people shaped the land and gathered together, in the things they carried, the stories they told and the care they showed, sometimes with grand monuments, sometimes with just a careful touch. It's easy to look at all this and wonder, were these people so different from us? Or are we just the latest chapter in a very old story? When you see the same patterns turning up in places separated by oceans and mountains, it starts to feel like there's something universal here. Not just a coincidence, maybe a need that runs deeper than culture, deeper than language. So next time you see a grave, old or new, think about what it means. Not just for the person buried there, but for the ones left behind, the ones who had to find a way to mark the loss, to make sense of it, to connect with something they couldn't see. The story isn't finished. Every new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, and the puzzle keeps growing, stretching back further than we ever guessed. The evidence is there, waiting to be uncovered, one careful layer at a time. Now, the real mystery. Why do these patterns keep showing up, even when people never met, never shared a language, never traded a single bead? That's what science still can't fully explain, and that's where we're headed next. So, after all this time digging, studying and guessing, here's the big question. Why can't we explain these ancient burials? Why does this pattern of ritual, care and belief show up almost everywhere, even before people could talk to each other across continents? Why do we see the same kinds of choices again and again? People who never met, who didn't share a language, who might not even have known that others existed, yet somehow they acted in ways that feel strangely familiar. That's the mystery scientists are still wrestling with. First, let's just admit it. The more we learn, the more confusing things get. You'd think that with every new grave, every new artifact, we'd get closer to the answer. But the puzzle gets bigger instead. It's like looking at a picture that keeps changing as you try to focus on it. You find a new piece, fit it in, and suddenly the whole image shifts. It's frustrating, but also kind of amazing. Take the spread of these burial habits. Some scientists thought maybe they started in one place and spread slowly as people moved around, like a new fashion that catches on. But when you look at the dates, that idea doesn't always work. There are places thousands of miles apart where similar things happened at almost the same time. Eastern Asia and Western Europe have burials with ochre, beads or animal bones, all from tens of thousands of years ago. Australia has its own ancient graves, with signs of painting and special objects. There was no way these groups could have shared ideas directly. So how did they come up with the same things? One answer is that humans just think alike. Maybe our brains are wired to seek meaning, to mark big moments, to mourn and remember. Maybe deep down these aren't learned habits, but instincts. When someone dies, we want to do something, anything. And over time, the same ideas pop up again and again, even in different places. It's a simple answer, but it's hard to prove. How do you test a feeling that might be built in? But there are other ideas too. Some scientists say it's not about instinct, but about the way people handle fear and loss. Death is scary. It's the biggest unknown. When someone in the group dies, there's a hole, an empty space that can't be filled. Maybe by creating rituals, people found a way to deal with that fear. The act of gathering, of laying out objects, of painting bones or carving marks, these are ways to take control, to say, we remember, we care. It turns chaos into order, even if just for a little while. And then there's another theory that's a bit more practical. Some researchers think these early burials are about keeping the group together. If you treat the dead with care, it shows respect. It also sends a message to everyone else. You matter, even after you're gone. This could help keep the living group strong. If people believe they'll be remembered, they may be more loyal, more willing to help each other. Ritual could be a kind of glue, a way to hold groups together through hard times. But if it's all about community, why the colours, the beads, the animal bones? Why spend hours grinding minerals, stringing tiny shells, or carving shapes into stone? That's where things get weird. These acts go way beyond what's needed for group survival. They take time, patience, and skill. Early humans had to hunt, gather food, watch for danger. Wasting a whole afternoon on a necklace or a pile of red powder doesn't help you find dinner. It doesn't keep you warm. But still, they did it, over and over. Some people think this is the real mark of belief. Not just belief in an afterlife, but belief in meaning itself. When you create something for someone who's gone, you're saying that the connection isn't broken, that there's a story, a memory, a link that survives. Maybe it's about the person, maybe it's about the group, maybe it's about something bigger, something nobody could put into words. Let's look at some examples that really stump the experts. There's a site at Sungir in Russia where 2 children were buried side by side. Their graves held thousands of beads, all handmade from mammoth ivory. People spent hundreds of hours making these beads. Who were those children that so much time was spent on them? Were they special? Were they leaders' children? Or did the group just believe that every life, even one cut short, deserved to be honoured in this way? We can't ask them, so we're left guessing. Another example comes from the Levant, where scientists found a grave with a person's hand cut off and placed on their chest. Around the body were animal bones, tools, and a strange arrangement of stones. Why the hand? Was it a punishment, a mark of honour, or something else entirely? The clues don't line up neatly. Every time you think you understand, another strange detail appears. And then there's the case of the so-called Red Lady of Pavland in Wales. This was actually a young man, buried with red mineral dust and surrounded by carved ivory rods, shell beads, and animal bones. The grave is over 33,000 years old. At the time, glaciers covered much of the land. Life was tough. Yet someone took the time to decorate this burial in a way that still puzzles us today. What drove them to do it? Was it grief, hope, tradition, or something we can't even imagine? One thing that comes up again and again is the use of objects that don't look useful at all. Tiny sculptures, shaped stones, feathers, or even bits of food, all placed with care. These things didn't help with hunting, building, or daily chores. They were about something else, maybe messages, maybe memories, maybe magic. The meaning is lost, but the effort is clear. Now let's step back and ask why our best scientific tools still leave us guessing. We have carbon dating, DNA analysis, even 3D scans of ancient bones. We can figure out how old something is, what people ate, where they travelled. But we can't read their minds. We can't see inside their hearts. All we have are the things they left behind and the marks they made. Sometimes the clues point in several directions at once. A necklace made from lion teeth could be a trophy, a charm, or a sign of leadership. A pile of ochre could mean blood, life, or just something pretty. Patterns in graves might show family ties, spiritual beliefs, or just old habits. There's rarely a single answer. And then there are the things that seem to break all the rules. In some places, people were buried with objects from far away, beads from hundreds of miles off, stones from the other side of a mountain range. How did they get there? Why bring something so rare to a grave? Was it a trade, a pilgrimage, or just a lucky find? The effort involved is huge. Someone had to carry these things, or trade with others, passing objects from hand to hand across the land. This suggests networks, stories, maybe even shared beliefs beyond the local group. Another strange thing. Sometimes the oldest graves are the most complex. You'd expect people to start simple and get fancier over time, but in some sites, the earliest burials are packed with objects and signs of ritual, while later ones are plain. Maybe beliefs changed, maybe people lost old knowledge, or maybe the meaning was always shifting, never fixed. Science likes patterns and predictions, but here, the patterns don't always make sense. The same ideas repeat, but with twists and surprises. It's like every group was making up the story as they went, but they all picked the same themes: memory, loss, hope, and the need to do something when faced with death. There's also the question of why these rituals started at all. Some experts think it took a leap, a moment when people realized that life didn't have to end with the body. Maybe this happened suddenly, sparked by a single event. Maybe it grew slowly, as small habits turned into bigger traditions, but nobody knows for sure. The change is there in the ground, but the reason is hidden. One idea is that these rituals grew out of the need to explain dreams or strange experiences. Imagine someone dies, but then their friends keep seeing them in dreams. Maybe they hear a voice or feel a presence. This could lead to the idea that something of the person survives. Over time, that idea could turn into rituals, ways to help the spirit, or to keep it away, or to invite its help. Or maybe it's about memory. Humans have long memories, and we like to tell stories. When someone dies, their story doesn't end. It gets retold, changed a little each time. Maybe the ritual started as ways to keep those stories alive, to remind people of who came before and what they meant. But even these ideas leave gaps. Why the same colours, the same shapes, the same kinds of objects? Why do spiral designs or animal carvings show up in places that never had contact? Some scientists wonder if there's something about the way the human brain works. Maybe certain shapes, colours, or actions just feel right. Maybe we're drawn to them, even without knowing why. There's also the possibility that some rituals grew out of accidents or mistakes. Maybe one group tried something new, sprinkling powder or burning a fire, and it seemed to work. The person was remembered, or the group felt better, so the habit stuck and was passed down. Over time it became tradition, even if nobody remembered the original reason. Habits can be powerful, even when the meaning fades. And then there's the question of belief itself. Some people think that as soon as humans could imagine things that weren't there, spirits, gods, and afterlife, rituals became possible. The switch was flipped in the mind and everything changed. But when did that happen? The evidence doesn't give a clear date. Some Neanderthals seem to have had rituals. Some early humans did not. The line is fuzzy, and it keeps moving as new finds are made. What's fascinating is that no matter how far back you look, these mysteries remain. We can describe what people did. We can measure, date, and map it. But the why is always just out of reach. The meaning is locked away, forever silent. Sometimes I think about this when I see news about a new discovery. Another grave, another set of objects, another puzzle for the scientists. The headlines always promise answers, but the truth is we end up with more questions. Why did they do it? What did it mean to them? Would we recognize ourselves in their faces, or would their world feel utterly strange? The honest answer is we don't know, and we may never know. That's part of what makes this so interesting. The past isn't just a story we can finish and put away. It's a conversation that keeps going, with new voices joining in all the time. So why is this mystery still unsolved? Because it's not just about bones and beads. It's about what it means to be human, about what we fear, what we hope for, and how we deal with the unknown. Every grave is a question, not just an answer. Maybe that's why these old burials matter so much. They remind us that people everywhere, at every time, have faced the same big questions. What happens when life ends? How do we remember? What do we pass on? And even though the details change, different objects, different rituals, different landscapes, the heart of it stays the same. The need to mark loss, the urge to find meaning, the hope that somehow what we do matters even if nobody remembers the exact reason. That's the mystery we're left with. And maybe, deep down, it's one we're not supposed to solve. Maybe the search itself, the act of wondering, of caring, of reaching for answers we can't quite grasp, is what makes us human in the first place. We keep digging. We keep guessing. We keep telling stories about the people who came before us and the strange things they did when someone died. And as long as we're doing that, the mystery lives on, just out of reach, but always, calling us to look closer. And now, as we move toward the end of this story, let's take a moment to sit with the mystery itself. Sometimes, not knowing is the biggest answer of all. Let's try to step back from all the details for a minute. When you zoom out, way out, what do all these ancient burials, strange objects, and puzzling rituals really show us? Why does it matter that so long ago someone took the trouble to do something unusual with a body, a bead, or a bit of painted stone? Why do we care so much about the meaning when the facts are so thin? Here's one way to look at it. These ancient choices force us to ask questions about ourselves, not just about people from the past, but about what kind of creatures we are right now. Why do we look for meaning in things that are gone? Why do we want stories, not just facts? Maybe it's because, deep down, we know that facts can only take us so far. There's always something bigger hiding behind them. Think about how different the world was back then. No cities, no writing, no maps or clocks. Life was short. Most people died young, and danger was everywhere. But even in a world like that, someone found time to make a necklace, to paint a bone, to dig a hole with care. They could have just left the dead where they fell, but they didn't. They stopped. They did something extra. It's easy to miss how strange this is. Animals don't do this, at least not in the same way. When a wolf dies, the pack might sniff around, maybe even mourn a bit, but then they move on. Chimps sometimes pay attention to a dead friend, but they don't build graves or leave behind objects. Humans are the only creatures who do this kind of thing, everywhere we've ever lived. That tells us something important. One way to think about it is that these rituals are a kind of message. Not one that's written down, but a message all the same. It's a message to the living, to the future, maybe even to something beyond what we can see. The message is simple. This person mattered. Or maybe we remember. Or we're still here. But there's more to it than that. These old graves are also about imagination. To do something for someone who's gone, you have to picture things that aren't right in front of you. You have to imagine a journey, or a spirit, or a world that doesn't end at death. That takes a kind of thinking that's hard to measure, but easy to spot once you know what to look for. It's the spark that makes us different from every other animal. Over time, this spark grew. The first simple burials turned into bigger, stranger rituals. People started to shape the land, build monuments, create stories that lasted for generations. You can see this in places like Stonehenge, the pyramids, or ancient tombs hidden deep under the earth. Each one is a kind of echo from the past saying, We were here. We tried to make sense of things. But even with all these changes, the basic question stayed the same. What happens when someone dies? Where do they go? How should the living act? Every culture came up with its own answers. Some believed in a land of spirits, others in cycles of rebirth, still others in nothingness. The details changed, but the urge to ask these questions never went away. Here's the interesting part. When scientists look at these old burials, they sometimes forget that the people who made them were just as confused as we are. They didn't have all the answers. They were guessing, hoping, trying things out. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they were trying to keep bad luck away, or to make sense of a loss that hurt too much to explain. In that way, they're not so different from us. There's also something comforting about this. It means that for as long as humans have been around, we've been facing the same mysteries. We've been asking the same big questions, and we've never fully solved them. That's not a failure. It's a sign that the questions matter more than the answers. Sometimes, when you look at an ancient grave, you can almost feel the weight of time pressing down. Thousands and thousands of years have passed. The world has changed in ways those early people could never have imagined. But the small details, a shell, a piece of coloured stone, a careful pose, still speak across the gap. They show care, thought, and hope, even when the reasons are lost. There's a lesson in this if you want to find it. The lesson isn't about who had the best tools or which group was smartest. It's about what happens when people take the time to do something for someone else, even if nobody will ever know why. It's about making meaning, even when the world seems empty or scary. That's something we all do, in big ways and small. Look at our lives today. We still have rituals for saying goodbye. We still gather, remember, and tell stories about the people we lose. We light candles, write messages, share old photos. Sometimes we don't even know why we do these things. They just feel right. They help us hold on, or let go, or mark the moment. In a way, we're not so different from those early humans, standing around a grave, not sure what comes next. And maybe that's the real answer to the mystery. These ancient burials aren't just about death. They're about life. They show us that people have always tried to find hope in the face of loss, that we've always wanted to be remembered, to matter, to leave something behind. Even when the world was harsh and short, people made time for meaning. You might wonder if we'll ever solve this puzzle. Will some new find, some new technology, finally tell us what those old objects meant? Maybe. But even if we could ask the people of Qafzeh or Sungir or Lake Mungo, they might not be able to explain it in words we'd understand. Some things are too deep, too tangled with feeling and memory to fit into a neat answer. In the end, maybe that's all right. Maybe the best thing we can do is keep asking, keep looking, and keep caring. The mystery gives us a reason to look back, to wonder, and to connect with people from long ago. It reminds us that no matter how much changes, some things stay the same. When you hear about a new discovery, a painted bone, a strange grave, a bead made from a shell, you can picture the person who made it. Someone with hopes, fears, and dreams. Someone who wanted to say, "Remember me." Or maybe, "I remember you." That's the thread that runs through all these stories. It's not about having the right answer. It's about asking the questions and caring enough to wonder. That's what makes us human. So next time you see a news story about an ancient burial or a museum display of old bones and beads, you'll know what's really hidden there. Not just objects or facts, but the oldest story of all. The story of people trying to make sense of a world they couldn't control. People who reached for meaning even in the dark. And as we drift off tonight, think about those ancient hands shaping shells, grinding stones, and laying out patterns for reasons we can only guess. They had their mysteries, we have ours, and somewhere in between we meet, across time, across silence, across the long, strange journey of being human. The story isn't finished. Maybe it never will be, but we're part of it, just like they were, and that's enough.